Have you ever asked the question, what is faith? We're continuing in our series about Job. Last week we talked about doubt and wisdom, and now we're talking about faith and trust. But you see, Job had a faith that gave God the benefit of the doubt, even in extreme suffering. So what is faith? What kind of faith does that? In Hebrews 1:11, we can see that faith is defined as being certain of what we do not see. So what does faith actually look like? Here we have a faith cycle, and now of course I know that there's always exceptions to the rule. Putting a cycle or chart to something like faith can be tough and not necessarily everyone's experience, but this is just what we see in scripture, I would say. And this isn't necessarily true for every single person, but it is a way that we can hold ourselves to a healthy faith. So this is the faith vision cycle, and I'm going to explain each step briefly. If you want to ask more questions, email me. I'd love to talk about it. So you see on the left here, it begins with revelation, and that's when you step out in faith. God gives you a vision, a spark, something to do. You see a need and you begin to step out in faith, and it feels good and you feel inspired. Then you see the next step, there's resistance. It can come from the flesh, which is your own bad habits and your own instincts that are not of God. It can come from the enemy, which is spiritual warfare, or it comes from the world, which is, the world, everything around us. If you're a leader, it can especially come from even the people that you lead. Next, we see desperation, which is the first of 2 points of vulnerability in our faith. Desperation is where you come to the end of yourself and you can't continue, you can't keep doing it. And you come to the end of your abilities, your talents, your ability to lead, your charisma, everything that you are cannot continue this vision that you've received from God. So this is where we have the temptation to just quit, just walk away from it all, faith, ministry, whatever it might be. But if we continue through that and we understand that that's why it's not about what we can do, but what God is doing through us, that's when we see God's provision come to pass. We get excited, and then the next step you see, we get to elation, which is, wow, I saw God come through. God's come through, and now you're excited and you can do it. And you know that you're shaped a little more into His image and that God has got you. God's got your back. You get that elation, that spiritual high, and then eventually it comes back down again. It can be a letdown, and if we're not careful, it can lead into a depression of faith, because we really come to a point where maybe that was all in my head. Maybe I did do it and it wasn't God. That leads to another vulnerable point, which is discouragement. You begin to question, you begin to doubt the character of God, the integrity of God, and all of a sudden you're not sure if you can continue anymore. But then if we hold on past that second vulnerable point, we see that we begin to have intimacy with God and integrity of heart, because we've been through the cycle. And then revelation comes again. And so, of course, I'm not saying this is everyone's experience. There's not really a solution to this up and down, because that's the way life is. But we begin to understand and process our experience and our faith through abiding in God. And that's the intimacy and integrity. We begin to experience intimacy with God through journeying with Him through the cycle, and integrity, because we can be trusted to continue the vision, continue the task that God has given to us, and to continue spreading His word through the world, the good news of Jesus, even if it gets hard. That's integrity. This is the trust and faith dynamic. Multiple times our faith and trust in God is put to the test, but we can continue in Him. This is just a way to illustrate to you kind of the faith and trust dynamic. I'll leave you with this. Dr. Paul Leavenworth once told me that faith is not spelled the way you think. Faith is spelled Trust. So ask this question to yourself: how's your trust in God? And do you trust God that His version of life is better than yours? Of course, if you have any questions about this cycle, because it's a lot, and I know I went over it very briefly, just email me, garrettminaka@unhope.org. See you soon.